Hello, beautiful people. Today we are going to be talking about fat loss. This is honestly one of my favorite things to talk about because I never thought that I would be somebody who was good at fat loss. I feel like I tried for so many years to lose weight and I could never stick to anything long enough to actually see results. So I'm really excited to share with you not only what worked for me, but what does the science say about how to lose fat, okay? So this video is going to be about how to engage in a successful fat loss phase. I'm choosing my words very, very carefully here. I'm not saying how to lose weight good. I'm not saying how to lose fat. I'm saying how to engage in a successful fat loss phase. The reason why I say fat loss phase because it's just that. Successful fat loss is a phase of your life. It's not a forever thing. You're not going to be forever deprived. And I feel like that's something that I fell for in the beginning, was feeling like the only way to maintain like a hot body or like a lean physique was to always be fighting to assert willpower. And when I ultimately didn't have enough willpower, because nobody is meant to be losing fat perpetually, I would blame myself and kind of punish myself for being so weak and undisciplined. But really, it was the diet that failed me. Not only that, but the word successful, why am I using the word successful? It's because I think there's a difference between just regular fat loss that everybody thinks it is and successful fat loss. And to me, successful fat loss is the difference between short-term fat loss and long-term fat loss. So really what it comes down to is, what's the point of putting in all this effort to lose all this fat if you're going to immediately gain it back? And that's kind of what I fell prey to for many, many years, was kind of like losing and gaining everything back and then some. And there are some things that are a pretty telltale sign that a fat loss phase is going to be unsuccessful. Typically, an unsuccessful fat loss phase is characterized by being hard and fast. The words that come to my mind are lose 40 pounds in a month. Skinny feels better than food tastes. Just beauty is pain. And in order to achieve what nobody else can achieve, you got to be willing to do what nobody else is doing. You got to push harder, and more is always better, and less food is always better, and more exercise is always better. And that isn't the case. In fact, studies show that losing more than 0.5 to 1% of your body fat per week greatly increases the chances that you will rebound and gain the weight back. So that's what unsuccessful fat loss is. Successful fat loss, in my opinion, and in the opinion of, honestly, the best coaches in the field, is characterized by being slow and steady. And when I finally did a successful fat loss phase, I literally had moments where I was like, whatever, why does this feel kind of easy? Why am I not starving? And the thing is, if you're a regular person, a common person who just wants to lower a little bit of your body fat percentage, fat loss doesn't have to be that painful. And in my opinion, fat loss can be as easy or as difficult as you make it in your mind. And for a long time, I associated a lot of self-hatred and punishment and like restriction with fat loss. So I already went into a fat loss phase with dread and with fear that you know what I mean, that my willpower would be challenged and this is going to be so hard. And I already went into it with these expectations. Whereas when I finally did fat loss the right way, I started slow and steady. I went into it with realistic expectations that this was going to take a while, that I shouldn't expect to lose 40 pounds in a month. If anything, I should expect to lose 4 pounds in a month. And when I went into it with that mentality, fat loss felt super easy. It felt super doable for me. And the best part of it all is that I was actually able to keep the weight off. So that was like 5 minutes of me just explaining what fat loss is and what fat loss isn't. In this video, we're going to be talking about successful fat loss, how to engage in a short-term diet, lose weight slow and steady, and keep it off for good. So that's just the context of this conversation. But before we dive into the juicy stuff, I don't think everybody is ready for a fat loss phase. And I kind of wanted to share with you some of the questions that I ask myself and some of the questions that I ask my clients to decide together if we are ready for a fat loss phase. Do you have a good relationship to food? Do you have a good relationship to the scale, the human body weight scale? Do you have a regular period? When was the last time you were in a deficit? How long did it last? Or when was the last time you were in a diet? How long did it last? And post-diet, did you have an equally long, if not longer, maintenance period? So if you dieted for 12 weeks, did you have a 12-week maintenance period? If you dieted for 16 weeks, did you have a 16-week maintenance period, if not longer? Have you been lifting for at least 12 weeks? Do you feel well-rested when you wake up in the morning? Are you getting 6,000 to 8,000 steps in per day? What's happening in your life right now? Is this an appropriate time to add more stress? And finally, I would ask myself, why is losing fat important to me? So kind of to break some of the questions down, what I need from my clients and from myself when I'm going into a fat loss phase is I want to be really uninterested in food. In fact, if you're able to go into a fat loss phase after either a long stretch of maintenance or a long stretch of bulking, where food feels so abundant to you that literally you cannot wait to eat less food, in my opinion, that would be the best case scenario. Because if you go into a fat loss phase with a high metabolism, already eating a lot of food, that means that when you go into a fat loss phase, you have more food to pull from. So imagine if you are only eating 1,400 calories a day, and then you decide to go into a diet, and in order to create that deficit, you have to eat 1,000 calories per day. That is so little food. That is literally an ungodly small amount of food. Whereas if you're coming from eating 2,600 calories a day, hello, you can be dieting in as many as 2,200 calories. That's amazing to go into a deficit, to be actively losing weight and not feeling like you're losing weight. And then the other questions are kind of just asking if you already have the foundations in place to support a successful fat loss. How is your sleep? Do you already exercise regularly? Do you already move your body regularly? Do you know how to cope with stress and manage stress? If you don't have these things under some consistency, it's just going to be more difficult to see fat loss. So if you're asking yourself these questions and you feel like you're not quite ready for fat loss, don't worry. I wasn't ready for fat loss. I literally gained and just kept my calories at maintenance and just learned how to lift for 2 years before I even dreamt about doing my first cut. So if you're not ready for your first cut, don't worry. I have another video, actually two videos before this one, where I talk about recomping and why you can make so much progress reverse dieting and recomping before you ever get into a fat loss phase. But if you did answer those questions and you feel like you are ready for a fat loss phase, let's fucking jump right in. So the first thing that we need to address is we need to create a deficit. So we need to first find where your maintenance calories are at, so we know how much food we're pulling from, so we know how to create that deficit. So there are two ways that you can find your maintenance calories. You can either use an online calculator or you can do it yourself. I much prefer the doing it myself method because those calorie calculators can be wildly inaccurate for most people, especially if you're a noob and you have little to no experience counting macros and you have no idea how much food is an appropriate amount of food for you to be eating. So I would do it myself. Here's how you do it. You track your calories for 1 to 2 weeks and eat as you normally would. So your goal here is not to eat more. Your goal here is not to eat less. Your goal here is just to observe how many calories you are currently eating day to day. After a week or two of doing this, you can average how many calories you ate per day. But by nature, if you're starting to track again, you're most likely going to be eating slightly better and slightly more consistently because you're observing what you're eating. Once you find out where your maintenance calories are at, then you can subtract anywhere between 250 to 500 calories from that daily maintenance. So for example, right now I'm maintaining my weight at about 2,400 calories. So in order to create a deficit, I would cut down my calories to 2,150 to create a 250 calorie deficit. And the reason why it's 250 to 500, it's because we understand that 1 pound of body fat is equal roughly to 3,500 calories. So in order to lose 1 pound per week, you have to be in a 3,500 calorie deficit for the week. 3,500 calories per week divided by 7 days, that's roughly eating minus 500 calories per day to lose 1 pound per week, minus 250 calories a day to lose half a pound per week. But eating less food is not the only way to create a deficit. You can also create a deficit by increasing your daily activity. So what I like to do is a combination of both cutting back on food and increasing my steps. But everybody is different. So like some people like to eat less so they can move less. Some people like to eat more so they have to move more in order to create the same deficit. Does that make sense? But for example, if you're somebody who's walking 6K steps a day, a really easy way to increase the amount of calories you're burning in a day is by tracking your steps and maybe trying to hit 8K steps or maybe trying to hit 10K steps. So yeah, for most people, it's best to just lower your food a little bit so you're like barely feeling that you're eating less food and increasing your steps a little bit. That really worked like a charm for me and a lot of my clients. I don't tend to introduce cardio for myself nor for my clients until the end of the cut, where our body's kind of getting tired of being in a deficit and our body starts to fight back on the fat loss that we're losing. So how to create a deficit? Eat a little bit less and move a little bit more. And then let's talk about how to measure progress. Quantifiable measures of progress for me include weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly progress pictures. It depends how serious you are about it. Typically, like bodybuilders will do a progress picture like once a week. I honestly take a picture of myself every time I work out for one. So that's kind of how I gauge progress. And then like a structured progress picture, I don't really take more than like once a month, and also primarily weighing myself on the scale. When you weigh yourself, the way that I do it is I'll weigh myself at the same time every day, wearing little to no clothing after I pee and after I poo if I can, and before I eat or drink anything. Now, I tend to weigh myself minimum 3 times a week, and if I'm feeling super crazy, I'll weigh myself daily. The more data points you have, the more accurate your measurements are going to be. And the reason why I weigh myself multiple times in the week is because our weight will fluctuate on any given day. That's just how it goes. Based on our hormones, how much water we're drinking, how much sleep we got, how intense our workout was, what foods we ate, and the foods that our body are reacting to, our weight is going to show up differently on any given day. So one weigh-in does not represent what's happening in your body. Multiple weigh-ins over time better express what is happening in our bodies. So typically, I don't compare my weigh-ins from day to day. I mainly compare my weigh-ins from week to week. So if I weigh myself multiple times a week, I'll take an average of my weight from week to week, and I'll compare how my weight average has dropped from week to week. And so to be honest, I don't really see a trend in my fat loss until I've been cutting for at least 2 to 4 weeks. 2 is like on the lower end. Like you can't really see a trend in weight loss after 2 weeks. It's after a month that you can kind of start telling a story and seeing things happen. So it really is very gradual. I also like to pay attention to my high weigh-ins from week to week, and I like to pay attention to my low weigh-ins from week to week. Because sometimes, even if your weekly average stayed the same, maybe you had a new low, or maybe you had a new high low. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to compare a high weigh-in to a low weigh-in. It makes sense to compare highs to highs and lows to lows. So there are different ways that you can kind of analyze this data. That's kind of how I measure progress, but also maybe I'm feeling better in my clothes. Maybe when I'm looking in the mirror, I'm starting to see more definition in my muscles. And just keep in mind that the times of day that you eat will impact your weigh-in. So like, if you eat dinner later than you usually do, that's going to be reflected in your weigh-in. Your weight might be a little bit heavier. If you're feeling a little bit more stress and fatigue this week and that affected your sleep, that affects how you digest your food. That might affect your weigh-in. What else? If you're about to get your period, that might affect your weigh-in. If you had a crazy workout and you're feeling super pumped and there's a lot of blood in your muscles and you're holding on to a lot of water, that's going to affect your weigh-in. So genuinely, I never get freaked out by one weigh-in alone. I observe my weight over weeks so that I can actually see what's going on. And with that being said, let's talk about how we work through fat loss plateaus. So if you know anything about fat loss, you will get a fat loss plateau. That's just how it works. It's because our bodies are literally adapting and trying to keep us alive. So when you eat less food for a consistent period of time, your body is going to start stepping in. Your body's going to start realizing that you're eating less food. It's going to start trying to survive off of less food, and it's going to down-regulate our metabolism. Not only that, but eating less food literally burns less calories. Being a smaller person, so having less mass on your body, decreases your metabolism, requires less calories to carry out your functions because you're just a smaller person now. But also, eating less calories naturally lowers our energy levels, and without us even noticing, we start getting a little lazy. And for example, like if you're somebody who likes to fidget and like tap your leg, and you're somebody who's really expressive when you talk, maybe when you're dieting, without even noticing, you start to fidget a little less, or you start to use your hands when you talk a little bit less, just because your body is finding really clever ways to conserve energy. I just think this is fucking awesome. Like, it's cool to know that our bodies do this. So now that we're aware that our bodies will slowly decrease our metabolism and kind of try to slow down our fat loss, we understand why, as we lose weight, fat loss kind of slows down from week to week until it eventually plateaus. If it plateaus, all we have to do is slightly decrease food again and or slightly increase activity again. In my experience, I did one 12-week cut. I literally maintained, so I was eating 2,100 calories for 6 weeks. I took a 1-week diet break, and the lowest my calories went was, I think, to 1,700 calories. In total, I only had to decrease my calories like 1 to 2 times before the end of my cut. So what I do is, first of all, how to spot a plateau. To me, a fat loss plateau has occurred when it's been 2 to 4 weeks that my weight has remained the same. It hasn't budged. There are a couple things we can do to work through plateaus. One being just lower food by maybe like another 1 to 200 calories. If you've never done fat loss before, I recommend being more conservative and then dropping more as needed. And then if you're feeling super hungry and you don't want to pull that much food, maybe pull a little bit less food and then just add a little bit more steps or add a little bit of cardio. So in my case, I remember when I did my fat loss phase, I never increased my steps and I never had to add cardio. I literally just lowered calories for 12 weeks. And that seemed to work for me. But I've had clients who have done better on a combination of both lowering food and increasing steps. It just depends how sensitive you are to hunger, then it just depends. Honestly, it depends on personality too, and just like preference. So yeah, the thing with plateaus is to not get so emotional, because it's our bodies and our results. It can sometimes be easy to kind of get into our heads about it and make rash decisions. So maybe chop your calories too low too quickly because you're like freaking out that you had one high weigh-in because you went out for pizza. You know what I mean? That's why it's important to be very objective and wait 2 to 4 weeks of data before you decide to drop calories again. Because what can happen is if you're a little bit too emotional, a little bit too overeager, and you drop calories too quickly without having to, it's almost like we're shooting ourselves on the foot, because you're lowering your metabolic rate more than you have to, and you're making yourself experience more hunger than you have to get the same outcome. And the whole point of a successful fat loss is that it's slow and steady, and that we're not feeling super hungry by the end of it. So that when it's time to increase our food and go back to eating a normal amount of food, we don't overcorrect and overdo it because we're feeling too hungry, and then we gain that weight back. A good, smart, intelligent fat loss phase is like a dance. We're walking this tightrope. We're basically trying to see how much food we can get away with eating while still seeing fat loss. Also, a good rate of fat loss is 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. So for example, right now I weigh 150 pounds. The higher end would be me losing 1.5 pounds per week. That would be a pretty aggressive fat loss phase. And the low end of that would be me losing about 0.7 pounds per week. I tend to stick to the lower end because I like to feel as little hunger as possible, and I also like to hold on to as much muscle as possible, because whenever we're trying to lose weight, our bodies doesn't just go, okay guys, make sure we only burn fat for energy. It also burns a little bit of muscle for energy. That's just how it goes. Same when you're bulking. Like, you can't tell your body, okay body, I'm going to choose to only gain muscle mass. You know what I mean? No, our body's going to be like, okay, we're going to store excess energy in the form of fat and muscle. Hopefully, though, if you do a bulk correctly, most of the energy that you're saving is going towards building muscle. And if you're doing fat loss correctly, most of the weight that you're losing is coming from fat and not from muscle. So really, if I'm doing a 12-week cut, I could lose anywhere between 8 pounds in 12 weeks and 18 pounds in 12 weeks. It just depends how aggressive I go. Whenever I did my cut, I did a 12-week cut and I lost about 12 to 15 pounds in 12 weeks. And that was super sustainable for me. I was able to keep that fat loss off effortlessly. I remember doing the cut and the whole time feeling so shocked at how easy it felt. And like the hardest part of it was just tracking calories. Finally, let's talk about how to not feel hungry and how to hold on to as much muscle as possible. I try to eat anywhere between 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of my ideal body weight. So if I'm weighing 150 and I want to lose like 15 pounds, okay, so I'm going to get down to 135 pounds. I'm going to try to eat around 135 grams of protein, okay? That's kind of how I base it. But the whole point about getting enough protein is that we're giving our body the building blocks so that we can hold on to as much muscle mass as possible while we're losing weight. And hopefully, if we do fat loss correctly, a majority of our fat loss is coming from body fat and not muscle. Also, eating lots, and I mean lots, of fruits and veggies. Fiber and protein is like the perfect double whammy combination to feeling super satisfied. Like when I did my cut, I was eating rice, protein, and veggies, and I always felt full. Like, it's really hard to feel hungry when the food that you're eating is super high in volume. Like, you're eating large quantities of food, but they're super low in calories, and fruits and veggies are seriously the way to go. What were some other things that I did to not feel so hungry? So when I did my cut, I was honestly pretty lax with it, and I would eat out every weekend. But keep in mind, I wouldn't go balls to the wall and have like a cheat day or like do like a cheat weekend. I would just enjoy life. Normally, me and my boyfriend would maybe go out once or twice on the weekends, and I would just mindfully enjoy. And the thing is, if you're doing a fat loss phase correctly, your appetite kind of shrinks. Whereas, like, whenever I did fat loss too aggressively and I would feel fucking starving all the time, it felt like my appetite grew times 10. But if you're just slowly decreasing the amount of food that you eat, you kind of like don't even notice that your stomach kind of like shrinks. I don't know if this is true, if this is science, but my appetite really did shrink to a point, right? It definitely got to a point where towards the end of my cut, I was like, I'm so over this. Like, I'm ready to eat again. But at least in the first half of the cut, it was actually kind of interesting to see that I was able to eat out once or twice a week and not feel like I needed to overdo it because I wasn't overdoing the cut and slashing my calories way too low. Does that make sense? I took days where I took counting breaks, and halfway through the cut, I did like 6 weeks of dieting, and then halfway through the cut, I enjoyed Thanksgiving. So I took a week off from counting and I just ate mindfully, and then I hopped back into the diet and I finished it strong. So that's another thing. What makes a successful fat loss phase is also the mental fatigue. It really is a mental game, and our minds give out way before our bodies do. And I definitely found that to be true whenever I dieted all the wrong ways. I would always cut my calories way too quickly, immediately start feeling deprived, immediately start being hyper focused on food. And when I finally realized that I needed to take a much slower approach to fat loss, it was just like food was an afterthought. Even though I was dieting, I felt satisfied because I hadn't slashed my calories. I really had only lowered my calories by how much? By like 20%. Okay? So that's really dope. Also, an appropriate fat loss phase shouldn't last longer than 12 to 16 weeks. Literally, you should go into a fat loss phase knowing that there will be an end date, and also not expecting to lose an X amount of number. Like for me, like I was telling you, I knew that there would be a range, but I wasn't sure if I was gonna lose the full 18 pounds or if I was only gonna lose 8. And I kind of went into it with no expectations. The only thing I wanted from myself was to prove to myself that I could stick to anything. Stick to calorie counting for 12 weeks. After my 12 weeks of dieting, I was definitely over it, and I immediately went back into maintenance, and I was able to keep the weight off. After you've successfully finished a fat loss phase, it's time to go into maintenance. I would just immediately increase your calories by like 200 to 300 and slowly reverse diet up. Every like 2 to 3 weeks, increase your calories by another 100 calories, and keep observing your weight to see how your weight is responding. Probably you're going to gain like 1 to 5 pounds. But it shouldn't be anything crazy. Actually, for me, when I started like reversing out of my fat loss phase, I continued to look better and I continued to lose weight. So that's something that happens too, is like when you start reversing, your body continues to respond positively to eating more food. And actually, I was so over calorie counting at the end of my 12-week cut that I kind of just immediately increased by 200 to 300. I tracked for a couple weeks, and then I just stopped tracking and started eating intuitively again. And since I wasn't super hungry because I did my fat loss correctly, I was able to do that, and it was fine. The only thing I regret is I think that I was used to eating so little that I think I undershot how much I should have been eating for a long time. So I think the next time I do a cut, I'm going to make sure that I reverse correctly all the way back up, because I'll continue to gain muscle. I'll probably continue to recomp more and I'll be eating enough food to kind of boost my gains a little bit. But also remember that the weight on the scale isn't only reflecting body fat. When we go back into maintenance calories and start eating a normal amount of calories again, our weight is going to inflate a little bit. For example, if I'm 150 and I'm trying to get down to 135, I should probably know that I'm going to be dieting for maybe 16 weeks. I'm going to try to get down to maybe 130, 131, 132, knowing that when I start eating a normal amount of food again, my weight will inflate back up to 135. Does that make sense? Because having more food in your stomach causes your weight to go up. Having more food in your stomach means you're holding on to more water in your body naturally, because carbohydrates bond with water. So if you're eating more carbs, you're holding on to a little bit more water. That's not reflective of your body fat going up. That's reflected of, hey, you have more water and food in your stomach. So to wrap it all up, successful fat loss is slow and steady, losing 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. And the more you lose, the more weight you lose, the slower your fat loss becomes, just by function. A smart, intelligent fat loss phase lasts between 12 to 16 weeks. Making sure that you're eating a lot of protein, eating a lot of fruits and veggies, preferably eating from home, and tracking your calories to do so. Because the more outside food you eat, the more sporadic your weigh-ins are going to be. So I tend to eat mainly home-cooked meals whenever I'm cutting, just so that my weigh-ins are more accurate. And finally, hopefully, if you do the fat loss phase correctly and you go into it with the right mindset, it doesn't have to be super painful. It doesn't have to suck. Yes, you have to be realistic with yourself and understand that, hey, this is a period where I'm going to kind of like reel it in a little bit. But I never felt deprived. I definitely knew that for a period of time, I would have to be a little bit more strategic with how and what I was eating. But it was like a work that I enjoyed doing. You know what I mean? Like when you're ready for a fat loss phase, like you're ready to reel it in. You're ready to experience that discipline. It's like exciting to know that you're working towards something, especially since if you're doing fat loss correctly, you know it only lasts for a certain period of time before you go back into a maintenance phase and enjoy your hard work. But yeah, that's all I have about fat loss. Honestly, I could have dove into even more detail about every single topic that we discussed. So feel free to ask me any questions that you have. I hope that I was able to give you like an overarching what to expect when going into fat loss. But really for me, what made the difference in finally doing fat loss the right way was just accepting in my bones that good fat loss is slow. And just because it feels like nothing's happening, that doesn't mean nothing's happening, especially if I have the data to back it up. It was really important for me to kind of detach myself from being obsessed with the outcome and just focus on enjoying the process of challenging myself with calorie counting. And when I used to be super anxious and I used to base a lot of my self-worth on the results that I was making and the way that my body looked, I was just always in a state of like stress and anxiety and body checking and stepping on the scale. My body was feeling that stress hormonally. I probably had higher levels of cortisol, and high stress in the body can also impact your fat loss. So if you're somebody who feels like you have like a tight grip over your nutrition and your exercising, and you feel like if you let go of that grip even a little bit, if you let it slip even a little bit, you're going to lose all of your progress, that's not a great place to be in. And for me, it was really holding me back from seeing progress. When I finally let go of that grip and just focused on enjoying exercise and enjoying the process, I've been able to be way more consistent, and I've been able to see way more progress physically, strength-wise, and I think a lot of other fitness professionals would say the same. and me having a positive outlook on the dieting experience, like going into it with a positive mindset of like, oh, this is going to be easy. Like, this is going to be great. And it just kind of flowed. Seriously, it just kind of flowed. And that's what I want for everybody. That's why I'm making this video. I want fat loss to just flow for you. I want you to be like, damn, that was awesome. And that wasn't even that bad. And I didn't even feel super fucking hungry and wanted to die. I'm going to stop talking. I've been talking for like an hour. So that's it for the fat loss lecture. If you like this video, please like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends that you think might need this information. And I'll see you in the next video.